Hey, this is Robin Wouters from Tech.eu, and I'm joined here remotely, of course, as usual, by Olaf Koch. He is a food tech investor, but we have crossed paths before. We were on stage together at the Pirate Summit in Cologne a number of years ago when he was still running Metro, which is one of the largest food retailers in the world, I would say, a German company. And before that, worked in a variety of industries as a management lead. Olaf, thank you so much for joining. What have you been up to in the last few years?
Yeah, well, it has been quite a journey since I left Metro. Setting up the fund is easily said, but then it's quite some work. And we're very glad that we got operationally in January after our first close. Yeah, and the whole space of food tech is super exciting. It is one of the pretty most dynamic areas right now in innovation. And I had the privilege actually to witness how food tech was emerging when I was CEO at Metro, as we were supporting innovation in hospitality. I could also, of course, observe how new food products were convincing consumers, and their growth was spectacular. So, yeah.
Yeah, you already mentioned you sort of jumped into the investor space. The company is called Zintinus. Why did you decide to go into investing in the first place?
Well, I would say it is a bit like, back to the roots. When I started my career, I actually launched a startup in the mid 90s, late 90s in data science. So I had my own experience in founding a company and developing the company, and actually then exiting the company. And then my corporate career actually took off quite a bit, and I never lost touch to the space of innovation. I kept on investing individually as a private investor. And when I knew that the task that I wanted to accomplish with Metro in repositioning the company on fully focus on food wholesale, and heal the balance sheet, and also ensure that the company is ready for the future with all the innovation, um, it was clear to me that I wanted to go back to where I come from, which is working on innovation. And what's better than doing that as an investor and trying to help people, of course, with access to capital, but much more than that, giving them access to expertise, networks, and open them doors.
And just out of interest, who's doing this alongside you?
Yes, so I'm privileged in having found great people that share the view that we have, that share the values, actually, that we have. And let me start with David. David has been the founder of Techstars. Techstars is the company builder platform from Boulder, Colorado. They started in 2006, and I believe they, in the meantime, have supported almost 3,000 startups through their curriculum. I did know David through the cooperation that we had at Metro. We had an accelerator program that was conducted in cooperation with Techstars multiple times. So I knew that he is someone who has a level of experience and expertise that I don't have, certainly. So very much complementary. And on the other hand, I also was always impressed by the attitude that he had, in this mentality of giving first and contributing to the success of young companies. So when I left Metro, I heard that he had handed over to his successor at Techstars. I gave him a ring, and as I said, I was very privileged that he agreed to join in. Next one is Fabio. Fabio is a food tech pioneer. He has been in food tech since more than 10 years, has established a number of platforms, has worked in various think tanks. He did lead the food tech practice at Metro as well. And when he as well was about to leave, we had a chat, and all of us were very glad that he joined in because Fabio has he's a brand in that space. He has a huge network, and a huge credibility. So we are super glad that he joined in. And the fourth in the team is Christian, whom I worked with since my days at Panera. Christian was a partner at Panera for long years. He is actually the best investment professional I ever met in my career. We kept on working after he left Panera on a number of projects at Metro, and having him in the team that completes actually the skill set. Very complementary, I would say, us as a team. and then very consistent and very aligned on the values and the strategic direction that we want to take.
Yeah, sounds like a fantastic team with a lot of relevant experience. Which brings us to the topic of food tech. It's one of these things, if you mention food tech to anyone, they all have their own definition of what that actually means. So, my first question to you about the topic is, what is food tech to you?
In essence, it is the attempt to replace existing food products by a more sustainable and or a more healthier version. Why is that necessary? I think people got aware about the fact that the food system itself has quite some impact on the climate. If if actually you look at the numbers, you could argue it is probably the biggest driver for greenhouse gas emissions. Up to a third of greenhouse gas emissions in the world are basically initiated through the food system. It is the number one consumer of water, predominantly through the agriculture, but not only. It is one of the biggest drivers for deforestation, because deforestation happens for a reason, and mostly it is because of cultivation of soy, which then actually turns into feed for livestock. So people got aware of that and started to look for alternatives to animal-based protein. And plant-based protein has been here for ages. I mean, since thousands of years, people have been eating tofu, seitan, drinking horchatas. So that's not totally new, but I think the demand is much bigger now. The consciousness of consumers is much higher. And on top of that, and I think in that sense, COVID actually was pretty a catalyst moment. People are much more aware about their health, and they started to figure out that yes, it matters what I eat. It makes a difference, and some of the food actually is not as good as it should be to me. And that's the second driver for food innovation, that people want to have the healthier version. And then not to forget, I mean, we are running into a situation where in a few years we might run out of protein. The population is growing quickly. Income levels are also increasing in various parts of the world. And with a higher income level, there's more demand for protein, and mostly animal protein. We will not be able to satisfy that demand. We must find the alternative. Otherwise, actually, the climate change is going to be accelerated. If we try to do that with livestock, there's no way. It's absolutely impossible. And then last but not least, in light of the terrible and criminal war in the Ukraine, I think that people got aware that food security matters. Having access to food becomes a priority now all over the place. We live in a global world, and we still have global supply chains. But I think we understand as well that these global supply chains have become much more vulnerable. And making sure that you have secure access to food also drives innovation. One, I think, great example for that is Singapore. Why is Singapore doubling down on food tech? Well, they want to get from 2% self-supply to 30% self-supply by 2030. That, I think, tells it all.
Yeah. So food tech, as you mentioned, spans a lot of elements. It's a very complex value chain. It's of course a huge market. I think the report speaks of $8 trillion global food market. That's huge, but it's also made up of a lot of complex elements, ranging from production to processing to packaging, distribution, etc. What are some of the areas there that you think innovation can play the biggest role in the short term?
Well, I think in the short term it's very feasible to find plant-based protein solutions that give you good nutritional value, but are yummy as well. And why has this trend picked up so much? Well, it's fair to say that some of the innovations have been here for a while, like plant-based milk. But I think the success of some of the brands, including their public listing, has raised attention. And plant-based is a good formula, and protein conversion on plant-based solutions is significantly better than the protein conversion on animal-based product, whether that is meat or that is milk. I think the same on meat replacement. We have seen almost a firework of innovations in recent years. starting with burger patties and chicken nuggets. And this is now moving into various other applications. And you will probably witness this yourself. If you go to the grocer of your choice, the supermarket in your vicinity, you will see that the space on shelf is getting larger and larger and larger because the variety is increasing. So therefore, I think plant-based for the time being has the biggest promise. And there's also, of course, the fact that it doesn't need any approval. It's not novel food. You don't need any authority to tell you you can go on and start to market the product. The other one that I think is super, super interesting is fermentation. We all know fermentation because we eat bread, because we drink beer. So it has been around for thousands of years as well. But it's now that people start to understand that actually using fermentation with mushrooms, with mycelium, and doing that in different circumstances gives you access to a variety of flavor, a variety of proteins. It is really mind-boggling. There are a couple of startups working on this that can come very close to the taste of meat that they will then combine with plant-based protein. But they can also create sweetness. They can create cream. And this is purely basic fermentation. If you then go one step beyond into precision fermentation, where microorganisms are used for that, I would almost say it's not the sky is the limit, the universe is the limit. This is a very early technology, I would say. And then people would tell me it's not, Olaf, it has been around for quite some time, but it's early in the application on consumer food products. That's what I mean. And therefore, I can only suggest that is an area to pay close attention. And then not to forget, there are far-reaching innovations like vertical farming, where you can bring the farm into a building, significantly reduce the space that you need to grow crops, significantly use less water, and no pesticide, no fertilizer. So a lot of benefits. Still here, you probably will have to face the issue of energy. It's quite energy consuming, and times like the ones we are living right now, we will need to find solutions in self-supply on energy. And then last one, and then I stop it, not to bore people. Of course, the whole notion of producing meat and growing meat. I consciously don't use the word of cell-based or laboratory meat. I would say to grow meat in a closed environment without growing animals is a huge promise. It's a huge opportunity that will not convince everyone. Some people will stay skeptical and probably not wish to consume such a product. But if it becomes feasible, and if it's industrialized, which right now is the problem, infrastructure is very expensive, the media to grow it is very expensive. But if it happens, it has the promise that it can supply animal protein to large parts of the world at a significantly less impact on resources out there in the environment.
Yeah, super interesting. I do notice that most of the things you mentioned are on the production side. You already mentioned earlier that the war in Ukraine and COVID, etc., has the ability to disrupt the sort of supply chain, food and access to food. I read in the report that close to 2 billion people in the world already don't have access to healthy diets today. So what's the innovation that we can do there in terms of distribution and access to healthy food?
Absolutely. And that's one of those areas that I did not tap yet into, which is functional food. The fact that 2 billion people don't have access to the nutrition they deserve has to do with a shortage of vitamins and other nutrition. And yes, we all know that the market of supplements has been around for quite some time, but it's now becoming, I think, much more feasible to combine these supplements as well with consumer products, i.e. fortified food, where I can give you access to omega-3 in a consumer product. I can give you access to vitamins. I can give you access to all kinds of nutritions, but now in a very cost-efficient and effective way. It might not be the best solution in giving people access to all what they deserve, i.e. fresh fruit and vegetable, and therefore having the real choice, but it might be a bridge to give people access to the nutrition in a functional way and in the meantime, hopefully prepare for access to real good food and fresh food.
Speaking of access to food, this is sort of a side question, but if you look at the craziness in the food delivery and grocery delivery space, especially in Germany and the rest of Europe, um, how do you feel about that? How do you look at that?
You mean quick commerce and e-grocery?
Exactly.
Well, let's start with the consumer. I think consumers love that. I mean, it's convenient. You don't need to leave your home. You get the groceries to your doorstep. So the value proposition from a consumer point makes sense. And then it is, of course, a very, very demanding business. You have significant incremental cost on the last mile. Preparing the last mile and then delivering the last mile is very expensive, and that in light of an industry that is not enjoying the highest margins, right? I mean, this is an industry that has always tried to optimize itself because it's living on a thin margin, and that is, I think, even more difficult in markets. And Germany is one of those where you have a high share of discount. Germany is 50% of the market roughly is discount, and a super high penetration of grocery stores. It's like, I think I don't dare to make that as a firm statement, but I assume actually Germany has the highest number of food retail square meter per capita. That means if in Berlin, if I go downstairs, it takes me 100 meters left, 100 meters right, and I find a grocery store. So are people ever willing to pay a premium? That's the I think the important conclusion here. In markets that are so highly penetrated and so high on discount, I at least have my doubts. So I know consumers would wish everything comes to their door. I'm not sure it's economically viable.
No, yeah, great answer. Going back to the report, you're now on the investment side. I read in the report that to really change the food sector for the better, we're going to need, up to 150 billion, maybe even up to 350 billion dollar of investment. Where is that capital going to come from?
Well, I think that it's still a very nascent sector, and last year it was close to 20 billion investment into food tech, into upstream food tech. It's also very telling that until very recently, the funds invested into downstream, like quick commerce and e-grocery, have always been above the upstream side. So generating new product was not that fashionable. And I think one of the reasons, of course, or two of the reasons is consumers were not changing habits. So consumers were basically socialized with the food they love, and there was little tendency to move into new product. That has changed. That has changed probably since 2015, and ever since you have more and more people switching their diets, switching products, and I think the generation of millennials and Gen Z are very, very powerful in that sense because they are curious, and food plays a much higher role than in Gen X and the Boomer generation. I think that is a big promise we see in the market that is changing consumer habits. The other one is introducing a food product comes with a lot of pain, and it's a risky business. Most of the innovations actually failed. Um, but now that we see these megatrends, we see a consumer consciousness changing, consumer habits changing. We see the necessity to do better for the planet, to protect the resources. We need to secure access to food for our generation and generations to come. And that, I think, is now accelerating an interest in an industry that was pretty much consolidated and very firm and very, very good in the quality and protected in the sense that there was not too much change. This is about to drastically change in the coming years. And as you said, there are people suggesting we will need 150 billion a year to get a meaningful impact, or up to 350 billion. Take the number. I mean, 19 is only a small percentage of what's needed, but the interest will grow as also the returns will demonstrate to be strong. And that is what we are absolutely convinced of. Here is a perfect formula that's going to be good for consumers, it's going to be good for the planet, and it's going to give superior returns to investors. And once we get that magic circle working, it's going to self-accelerate. That's my pure belief.
Great. Final note about the report or the white paper that you co-authored was Europe. A large focus of the report is on Europe. Why is that the case, and why? What's the role of Europe in this global food supply chain?
Well, it starts, of course, with the fact that yes, we are based in Berlin. The fund has been established in Germany. We have also, of course, our office in Boulder in Colorado. But yeah, we have a European origin. Let's start with that. I think the second is as well. We wanted also to probably inspire people to rethink whether we should let that happen elsewhere in the world or we double down in Europe. What do I mean with elsewhere? I think that Singapore has turned out to be a pioneer in food tech. Israel is very advanced. The United States have taken a lot of action in that space. And then it's true that Europe is the biggest net exporter of food in the world. The biggest net exporter. Europe is admired for the food culture and the food quality. I mean, speak to people from around the world and talk to them. If they visited Europe and you ask them, what do you like? Of course, they will talk about, some of the cities, some of the spectacular things that they visited. But most often, the second or the third thing is food. And they love, the Italian food, the French one. Around Europe, we have such a diverse food culture, 27 member states in the EU, and almost none is the same like the other. Not even in a single country. I mean, the food culture in France, wherever you go to France, is different. And we have the highest density of chefs in a relatively small part of the world. So we have masters of food in our community that know how to process the new stuff. And all of that in combination, I think, gives a great soil to nurture the new food. Now, on top of that, we have a great basis with academia. We have wonderful universities. Wageningen in the Netherlands probably is one of the most iconic right now in food tech. And we have a European Green Deal. The European Union, the European Commission has committed to fight climate change. And they are aware that the food sector plays a great role. What do we need to add to that? Well, I think we need to learn from other people how to become more effective, how to deploy more capital. And I think there on capital, I think the benchmark probably is in the United States on being more effective. Also the United States and transferring knowledge from universities into business with the TTOs, the technical transfer offices, have been pioneers, but Israel has copied that with pride and is even better probably now. Singapore is doing something very similar. So we have a position of strength in food right now in the world. Europe is admired for that, but we cannot sleep. No one is waiting for us. If we don't take advantage of the opportunity that is arising, we might be surprised that in a few years our position is not as strong anymore. Now, I'm always an optimist. I would say the chances for Europe to become an even stronger leader are way higher than the risk that we will not take action.
Great. We need more optimism in this world for sure. Final question. Where does the name come from, Zintinus?
Well, it's a curious story. When we started to consider alternatives for names, we were looking in translations of sustainable around the world in various languages. And actually, there was nothing that really resonated well with us. And then we found a Latin translation, which was Zintinus with a Z and a W. So Zintinus. And we found that quite interesting. And then we noticed it's actually it's not applicable. People don't know how to spell this. And we took the liberty to replace the C with a Z, and we cut off one U, and there you are. That's Zintinus.
Great. Well, welcome to the investment side. I'm looking forward to seeing which investments you make in the years to come. Thank you so much for putting out the report. We'll link to it, of course, in the show notes. It's a very interesting read. Olaf, thank you so much for your time and best of luck with everything.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to speak to you.